Yeah, look, I'm from Longreach, and really, to be honest, we don't have a lot of carbon projects up there, very few. Mainly, one of the main reasons we don't have as many trees as you guys, obviously. But one of the things, I suppose, before today, I've probably learnt more about carbon today than I've known up until this point, actually. It's been a great day. So I'm from Longreach. We've got a property up there. We also run a consulting business in town. And I'm part of a Climate Champions program. I don't know if you've heard of that. There's about 40 farmers around Australia that are involved with that program. And part of that program is helping agriculture to adapt to climate change. And it's been an interesting time. Now this is, that's a picture from Longreach, and what do you think? Do you reckon it looks like that at the moment?
Last year, wasn't it?
Well, it was a couple of years ago. Yeah, no, it looks a little bit different to that. Cracker can probably tell us, he's seen it from the air. It looks pretty ordinary at the moment. Probably, yeah, much worse than here even. So, yeah, pretty ordinary. Look, Darren thinks I'm going to talk about carbon. Has he actually gone? He's not in the room anymore, is he? Good. Holding back. I'm not going to talk about carbon at all because I don't know a lot about carbon. I think everyone else here knows a lot more about carbon than I do, probably by the sound of it. One thing I do know after today is seriously thinking about selling at Longreach and moving down to Charleville where the mulga is so I can get into this carbon. Those figures look pretty good. Or even maybe down to Dubbo, those figures look really good down there. Now what I want to talk about a bit is about productivity. So it's nothing to do with carbon, is it? So, another good Longreach shot there. What I wanted to talk about is what's our core business? Now a lot of us in the room are farmers. I saw some hands go up before. Sheep, cattle, goats. So what's our core business? What are we here? What do we hear? What do we do every day? We grow grass? Well, sometimes we grow grass. I'm not sure about that anymore, but yeah, no. We do grow grass and hopefully we turn that grass into money at the end of the day. That's pretty much our job, isn't it? That's why we're in this industry. Well, we wouldn't be doing it for the fun or the money or whatever. No, of course, that's our core business. So our core business is about taking grass and turning it into money. What do we get paid for at the end of the day? If we're in cattle, what do we get paid for? Kilos of beef. Yep, sheep, wool, whatever. Kilos of beef. So let's just talk a little bit about that. Now, lucky for you guys, when ABARE does their figures, Charleville and Longreach are in the same big region. I don't know why they do that, but that's what they do. And they tell us that our return, so that ROAM up there, an acronym, return on asset managed. So it's basically the return we get on our asset. And it's not that exciting, to be honest. Like, it's about 1.5 to 2%. And that's long term. Does that surprise you? Anyone going, nah, it's way better than that? Anyone surprised by that? No? No new figures? That's a long-term figure. So obviously there's years when it's a lot better than that. And like if you're in a droughted area at the moment, there's years like this when it's going to be a lot worse than that. The figures we've done for our area, average producer around us is going to go back about 300 to 500,000 if it rains now, like if it rains this year. If it doesn't, well, I don't even want to work those figures out. But that's the reality, that's where we are. So pretty low returns. Up where we are, we just did some figures on a bit of a survey of a sort of a group of clients up there, and the average business value was about 4.5 million. Now that was saying property value roughly around 3 million probably, stock, plant, machinery, all up, about 4.5 million. I don't know, how does that compare with this area? I looked a little bit up, did a bit of research before I came down here. There's sort of property values all over the place, obviously dependent on the country type, area, all those normal sort of things. Is that an unrealistic figure for down here? To say like a full living area? Pretty close?
Pretty high.
Too high. What would you say? 3 million? 2 to 3 for a living area? Yep, how many sheep, is that sheep or cattle, Malcolm? Both?
Well, I think probably a living area is 800 to 1,000 feet.
Down here, yep, okay. Yep. So that's so about 3 million. So if you add, that's the value of the place, 3 million, or that's all up with stock and plant? Just the place. So 3 million for the place, that's about the same. Yeah, we're about, 30,000 acres up there, $100 an acre, 3 million, that's probably a living area up there. So you add on the value of the stock, add on the value of the plant, you're probably not not that far different, I don't think. Maybe. Anyway, that's the business value. So anyone good at maths? If we know that we're returning about 1.5 to 2%, we know roughly the value of the business about 4.5 million. Everyone's looking at the accountant over here to say, what's that going to mean? Hopefully you get it right. I don't know if you can read that, but so it's the return before interest and tax is about 72,000 to 90,000. Now, does that scare anyone yet? Have I scared anyone? That's not a really exciting figure, is it? And are we all thinking at this point, no, that's too low? Anyone thinking that? Got you all bluffed, great. Well, the reality is, over the long term, I mean, obviously, if you take a year like this and you take $500,000 backwards, that blows your average way out of the water. And that's what these figures are. It's over a long-term average. So, then we take, and we add this on. The last QRA debt survey, it's a little bit out of date now because I haven't done one since, but average debt for our region up there is about 1.6, 1.5, 1.6 million. I don't know, does that compare down here? Is that similar? Higher, lower? Similar? Yeah. So it's about 1.6 million. So now, if you're paying, say, 4.5%, 5%, whatever you're paying, your probably debt servicing's probably about 80 grand a year. So now, I'll just give you a minute to think about those figures, because you're going to see something there that's obvious, isn't it? What's the obvious thing there? Can I just want to put something up on this board. If we think back to Granddad's day, or maybe even great-granddad's day, depending on how long you've been around. Do you remember when he left the place and handed it on to the next generation? This is we generalist, but in those days, a lot of times the place was handed on with next to no debt. And often there was an off-farm asset to hand off to another family member. That sound about right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to go back. So we'll go about here. Here's great-granddad's day, and we'll put granddad there and dad there, and maybe us there somewhere. Okay, what about the next generation? When, say, maybe granddad passed it on to dad. Generally, there might have been a little bit of debt in the system. Might have been a few off-farm assets, but maybe not as many. Sound about right? And then probably maybe our generation, when we probably took on a reasonable sized debt. And if we were thinking about handing it on to our kids, say maybe there, and we wanted to do a sort of equitable succession plan, there'd probably be a significant amount of debt in the operation. Would that be right? No one's arguing? I must be right. Okay, why is that? Why is that? Have we all been doing a terrible job all these years?
Production costs and low commodity prices.
Look, I knew there had to be an economist in the room. Thank you. See, if there was an economist here, he'd draw a beautiful graph and it'd look something like this. That's the real return for our products. It's up and down. There's been some times in the 50s, there's probably a bit of a peak up there most of it. But the real value of agricultural production is coming down. Okay, what are costs doing? The real value of costs. Yeah, so there'd be another line here that went sort of like that. It'd probably be a little bit more accurate than that.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty straight that one.
Fuel goes up, fuel goes down. No, look, so what happens is, say in great-granddad's day, that's the margin that he was dealing with. That's the margin for profit in real dollars. Okay, so granddad was there, dad was there, that's us, our kids are going to be in here. Now, why do we know that graph's right? Because of those figures. Okay, we look at those figures and we go, gee, that's a bit tight. There's not a lot left over. And we go, well, is that right? And we know it's right. In our heart, we know it's right because we've seen it in our families. We've seen that exactly happen, haven't we? And that's the reason. Okay. So, pretty sad talk so far. Okay, so we did some studies, some surveys recently. I should be talking into this, shouldn't I? Is that, you're right? I should? Okay. We did some studies recently and we took some survey data and had a look at some businesses. These are mainly Longreach and further north, so not many mobile places in there, some desert country in there, a bit of everything else. What we looked at was So those figures I just gave you that made you feel depressed, they're the averages. So they're averages taken from ABARE data. So that's everybody. Okay, so this data here is now a bit of a smaller group. So this is a group where people are probably doing something. They're making some actions to make an improvement. Now, I probably should say something to give myself some credibility here. The only reason I'm here, I think, is because our property was one of the properties that was used to develop the herd management model, the methodology. Okay, so Richard Eckhart came out there from Melbourne Uni, did a lot of testing, looked at our numbers and used those numbers to help develop that herd methodology. That's really probably... And part of that, why we did that methodology there is we've adopted a lot of the strategies that these guys up here are using, and a lot of you probably are already too. So we looked at ABARE data, average is about 1.5 to 2% return, which is the main number. The average of the survey we did was 3%, and the top 20% were 4.5 to 5%. So what does that tell us? You know, if you were making, say, 1.5 to 2%, we saw that realistically you're on the edge of going backwards. So you really need to probably be at 3% return or better to actually be going forwards. And it doesn't sound like much. It's only 1%. What's the difference? But it's the difference between going forwards a bit and going backwards a bit. That's the difference. So the case study data on the side there, that's a business that we did a lot of work on, and it was a business that was probably starting to head into trouble. Like, it wasn't in trouble, but